Judges ready? Affirmative team? Let's begin. There is one crucial thing that both the affirmative and negative team can agree upon, right up front, and that is that goal of U.S. strategic interests. I'd like to start off by agreeing with the affirmative team that the goal we should be working towards, both as the affirmative and negative, is U.S. strategic interests. And our basic philosophy as the negative team is that maintaining the status quo and keeping Sudan on the state-sponsored terrorism list is in fact the much better way to pursue U.S. strategic interests. It is for this reason that a negative ballot is warranted. I'd like to look over the arguments made in the first affirmative constructive and bring up responses of my own to demonstrate why strategic interests are obtained in the status quo. First of all is their fact one, which is this idea that Sudan complies at the moment with the regulations of the SSOT list, which would then warrant them to be removed. My partner asked in cross-examination whether the affirmative speaker knew how long Sudan has been complying with these benchmarks. They answered that they did not absolutely know. The problem with this is my response is that Sudan has historically supported terrorism. According to Matthew J. O'Brien, he wrote on May 16th of 2017 on immigrationreform.com, quote, "Since gaining independence in 1956, Sudan has always been a hotbed of Islamic terrorism, ruled by a succession of military regimes with significant ties to terrorist organizations. The United States has repeatedly suspected it of harboring members of Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hamas, and a host of other dangerous jihadist groups," unquote. This is a concern that has existed since all of our relationships with Sudan decades ago. It has been believed to be unstable and linked with terrorist groups, both their government and their country as a whole, for a very long time. And because the affirmative team has not provided a timeline for how long they have followed these standards, it is very easy that they could simply fall away. So the next point I'd like to address is their fact two, which is that the United States has strategic interests in Sudan. And my response to this is that we agree that the U.S. has strategic interests in Sudan. However, those strategic interests are fulfilled by keeping them on that list. So our response is essentially this, that the list is a political tool. The SSOT list is a political tool. According to Ashish Kumar Sen, he wrote on foreign policy for the Atlantic Council on July 14th of 2017 that, quote, "The Clinton administration designated Sudan as a state sponsor of terrorism in 1993. U.S. administrations have since used the designation in the case of Sudan, and not just in the case of Sudan, as a political tool," end quote. The impact of this piece of evidence is that we have to consider the reason this SSOT designation was put into place in the first place, because it creates a political tool of leverage. And we agree that strategic interests are in place for us in Sudan, but those strategic interests are better pursued by maintaining the status quo. Their fact three was that Russia is primed for control. And we have a few responses to this that were indicated also by my partner in cross-examination. My first response is nothing lost. Nothing lost. Now this is very important because the interests that were stated in the 1AC in Sudan was essentially dealing with the war on terror. Now they contend that the war on terror has not been going very, very well for Sudan, and they have not been playing their part. But then they said that the main disadvantage and the main problem that would happen by keeping them on the SSOT list is that Russia could be involved with them. However, nothing is lost this way. Just because Russia is someone who we don't like does not mean that it's a problem that they're invested in Sudan. The affirmative team in their case did not explicate what would happen if Russia started being involved in Sudan, and what would happen that would result in a concrete harm for the United States. At this point, nothing is lost, even if Russia does indeed start being involved more so in Sudan, if they stay on the SSOT list. The second point is speculative result. They brought up in their 1AC saying that, well, perhaps there could be civil wars in that region because of Russia supporting one particular leader in that region. That quote that brought up essentially speculated that that could be the case, but we can't really make a judgment on that until that takes place. It's a speculative harm to Sudan. And the third and final response is that the U.S. is not affected. If we grant the affirmative team the benefit of the doubt that Russia will eventually start taking control of Sudan, and that these civil wars even do happen within Sudan as a direct result of Russia's involvement, if we grant them those 2 points, as it stands, there is still no harm to US strategic interests. Because if the affirmative team believes that our purpose with them in fighting Al-Qaeda and fighting terrorist groups is a terrible purpose, since they've been doing a terrible job at that, then the United States is not harmed by having Russia become involved. Because Russia does not present a direct threat to the United States and our security in any concrete way by being involved in Sudan. I'd like to bring up one primary disadvantage for why the case brought by the affirmative team should not be passed, and that is losing leverage. According to Robbie Gramer, a diplomat and national security reporter at Foreign Policy, he wrote on November 8th of 2018 that, quote, "The United States has to ensure that it rings out serious reform before lifting Sudan's state sponsor of terrorism designation. In a relationship where the U.S. has already lacked leverage, lifting the designation is losing a huge piece of leverage. From a tactical viewpoint, it's the last thing you would want to give away." That's what he said, unquote. Now, this is incredibly important, and John Prendergast, a human rights and anti-corruption activist in U.S. News, he wrote about the impact of this on February 23rd of 2018. He said that, quote, "If the U.S. decides to press ahead with normalization negotiations, then significant benchmarks, pressures, and incentives would make that process more impactful," talking about removing Sudan. "There is a huge obstacle for the U.S. achieving any of those policy objectives: insufficient leverage, which requires an integrated set of incentives and pressures that are tied to benchmarks. The incentives there are easy. The Sudan regime wants to be removed from the state-sponsored terror list, but removal from the terrorism list should not occur until some of the core benchmarks outlined above are addressed. Otherwise, the unreformed state, once it has hoodwinked the U.S. into giving it what it wants, will revert back to its base instincts," unquote. And the idea of losing leverage is incredibly important because, again, as I brought up in an earlier point, the affirmative team has not outlined how long Sudan has met these benchmarks and whether it's something that will hold. Or will Sudan simply go back to the process that has been followed in years past, them making promises and them starting to make reforms, but then not actually following through with them? Them meeting the benchmarks for an unspecified amount of time, we agree with that. The affirmative team mentioned that, and we agree. But they do not explicate how long that has been. And from that, we cannot draw conclusions about whether Sudan will actually follow through on what they're trying to do. And so again, I'd like to go back to that goal of U.S. strategic interests. We need to recognize that the state sponsor of terror list has existed for a reason, not just for Sudan, for a number of other countries. Since we believe Sudan is not doing a good job in dealing with the terrorist threat in their nation, and we have concerns of corruption at the deepest level there, it's reasonable to maintain the status quo in order to achieve those stated strategic interests. Thank you very much. Now stand open for cross-examination.